Welcome to the Bible Book Club. Now, some of you have asked if you can give to the podcast, and for the first time ever, the answer is yes. Bible Book Club is officially a nonprofit, and you can give to it. So, what are you giving to? Well, we're rather simple in our structure. Heather, Buck, Haley, and I do this in our free time. That means all of your gifts will be used to reach new listeners. Currently, the podcast has grown by word of mouth and just $1,000 a month of personal funds used to reach new listeners through digital ads. But think about how much we could grow the podcast in 2025 if you gave and we doubled or tripled that monthly spend. Ponder the math and consider giving today so that we can reach more listeners like you. We will put the link to donate in the show notes. Thank you for listening and giving. This is the Bible Book Club,
the book of First Chronicles.
Welcome to the club.
Last episode, we did chapters 16 and 17 of First Chronicles. Now, let's remember that what the chronicler is doing here is giving a little history lesson to the Israelites so that they would return to Jerusalem and come and worship. So in this history lesson, the ark is safely in Jerusalem. The people of Israel have returned to God's original plan for worship, which was given to Moses. They worshiped with sacrifices of burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then they worship with music and songs of praise. David was also very specific in what they should sing. Remember, David loved music and he wrote music. Our chronicler recorded the song that most likely was a compilation of 3 different psalms. With the kingdom at peace and worshiping as they should, David's thoughts turned to his next project. His desire was to build a house for the Lord, but that was not to be. God informs David that he would build a house for him, but not a physical house, a dynasty. The promises God made to David, it's called the Davidic covenant. The covenant specifies that God will establish David's throne forever. From David would come an eternal king. David is overwhelmed with God's favor, and he prayed to God with humility, wonder, and confidence that God would do as he promised.
Okay, in chapters 18 through 20, the chronicler continues to tell David's story. In these chapters, it's going to be David's quest to create an Israelite empire. And it was a quest that involved many conquests. But it was important to David because God had promised it. And therefore, it is important to our author, for he is intent on the returned remnant, knowing that God fulfilled the promise he made in 1 Chronicles 17 when he made the Davidic covenant with David.
1 Chronicles 17, starting in verse 9. And I will provide a place for my people Israel and will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore, as they did in the beginning, and have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people Israel. I will also subdue all your enemies.
David played a huge role in subduing Israel's enemies. Israel was once a mighty nation under David, and the chronicler believes that they can be so again. The promise is not over. The Davidic covenant lives on, but they must be faithful and return to God. And if they do, God will again subdue their enemies because they're living as a remnant amongst enemies again. With that purpose in mind, to encourage the remnant with a vision of what could be, the chronicler tells the story of how David accomplished this. Scene 1, David delivers defeat to the nations. So David expanded the Israelite empire by defeating the nations or enemies on the land surrounding Israel. The author starts with a summary of this accomplishment and then highlights the big victories.
1 Chronicles chapter 18. In the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them, and he took Gath and its surrounding villages from the control of the Philistines. David also defeated the Moabites, and they became subject to him and brought him tribute. Moreover, David defeated Hadadezer, king of Zobah, in the vicinity of Hamath when he went to set up his monument at the Euphrates River. David captured 1,000 of his chariots, 7,000 charioteers, and 20,000 foot soldiers. He hamstrung all but 100 of chariot horses. When the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David struck down 22,000 of them. He put garrisons in the Aramean kingdom of Damascus, and the Arameans became subject to him and brought him tribute. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. David took the gold shields carried by the officers of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. From Tebah and Kun, towns that belonged to Hadadezer, David took a great quantity of bronze, which Solomon used to make the bronze sea, the pillars, and various bronze articles. When Tau, king of Hamath, heard that David had defeated the entire army of Hadadezer, king of Zobah, he sent his son Hadaram to King David to greet him and congratulate him on his victory in battle over Hadadezer, who had been at war with Tau. Hadaram brought all kinds of articles of gold, of silver, and of bronze. King David dedicated these articles to the Lord, as he had done with the silver and gold he had taken from all these nations: Edom, Moab, the Ammonites, and the Philistines, and Amalek. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, struck down 18,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. He put garrisons in Edom, and all the Edomites became subject to David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went.
That's our author's summary, and he highlights this point. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. This is the chronicler's main point, and he repeats it twice. It was because of the Lord that David defeated the Philistines in the west, the Moabites in the east, King Hadadezer of Zobah in the north, and the Arameans when they tried to help Hadadezer, and the Edomites in the south. Basically, every nation surrounding Israel fell to David and his men. And it will be because of the Lord that Israel will be blessed again, is the chronicler's hope. In addition to these victories, David dedicated all the gold, silver, and bronze taken from these countries to God. And note, Solomon would use all that bronze in the temple building, along with some more precious metal sent to him as a congratulations for his victories from Tau, king of Hamath. Scene 2, David's royal cabinet. Next, our author takes a little detailed detour to inform us of how David accomplished so much. He set up a very efficient government.
Verse 14, David reigned over all Israel, doing what was just and right for all his people. Joab, son of Zeruiah, was over the army. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was recorder. Zadok, son of Ahitub, and Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, were priests. Shavsah was secretary. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and Pelethites, and David's sons were chief officials at the king's side.
All right, note that Heather read in verse 14 in the beginning of this segment, all Israel. It is one of our chronicler's favorite themes. He is all about unification. And David ruled over all at this time, and that's what he was trying to get them back to. He also ruled by doing what was just and right for all people. He is the king by whom all kings were measured. He's the standard for Israel until one would come that surpasses even David, the perfect son of man, Jesus. All right, let's talk about this cabinet. David's royal cabinet has 3 distinct departments: a war office, a priestly office, and an administrative office. Now, in this list, the author lists these men in a chiasm. We've talked about a chiasm before. The first and the 6th people mentioned go together and form the war office. Then the next circle and the 2nd and the 4th go together and form the administrative office. And in the middle is always the most important in a chiasm, and that's the priestly, the 2 people who are in the priestly office. So it's a little confusing unless you're reading it and really looking at it, and then you realize the chronicler's making a point by putting this in a chiasm and putting the priest's office in the middle. They were the most important.
Is that because he was most likely a priest, as we talked about before Ezra? Probably.
Yes.
Right?
But exactly, it always gets back to the priesthood is the most important. So the war office consisted of Joab, David's nephew by his sister Zeruiah, who was over the army, and Benaiah, who was over David's royal bodyguard. Benaiah actually is going to replace Joab eventually. David and Joab, we've read about this, had a tumultuous relationship. Joab was a brilliant but ruthless military leader. He committed 2 crimes of murder that led to his falling out with David. As a result, David told Solomon on his deathbed to execute Joab and to replace Joab with Benaiah. All right, the priestly office, the one in the middle, consisted of Zadok and Abiathar. So first, let me point out that the chronicler got his father and sons mixed up. He says Ahimelech, son of Abiathar, but in 1 Samuel 22:20 and 2 Samuel 20:25 and 1 Kings 1:7 and Mark 2:26, they all say that Abiathar is the son of Ahimelech.
As if it wasn't all confusing enough.
I know. But remember, our chronicler is telling the story of a story that was told hundreds of years ago in 1 and 2 Samuel. So he has these writings and he's poring over it. And that's why, remember, he got rid of Saul quick. I don't want to tell that story. Bad story, Saul. I'm going to get to David. We all have to go back to David because we went through all these other kings and they were terrible. And let's just look if we could get back to David. And so this is what he's focused on. And he's reading all these old books from Samuel's day. And he's summarizing them. He's skipping the bad points. He's highlighting the good points because he's trying to encourage the remnant. So if he makes a slight typo,
no AI to organize his thoughts.
Because he did get through the genealogies really well, we have to admit, this one little blip right here. But eventually, Abiathar will be exiled because of his support for Adonijah as David's successor. And Zadok will become chief priest in Solomon's administration. But he fairly lists them both here because, of course, he's telling the story in order, and we haven't gotten to that yet. The administrative office consisted of Jehoshaphat and Shapshah. It's thought that Jehoshaphat's position of recorder may have been similar to a herald or one in charge of royal protocol and a public spokesman for the king, while Shapshah's position of secretary would have been as royal scribe responsible for all official correspondence. Last, in this section, there was this controversial line about David's sons being chief officials. In 2 Samuel 8, they are referred to as priests, but clearly that was not in the Levitical sense, as David would never alter God's plan for the priesthood. So it's assumed that David's sons served as trusted aides and may have represented the king in various regions. Like he may have spread them out, which truthfully, they needed to be spread out because they were always at war with each other. Okay, back to David's expansion of the Israelite empire by defeating the neighboring enemies. So our author's jumping back now to his original story about how David defeated everyone. Scene 3, David defeats the Ammonites.
1 Chronicles chapter 19. In the course of time, Nahash, king of the Ammonites, died, and his son succeeded him as king. David thought, I will show kindness to Hanun, son of Nahash, because his father showed kindness to me. So David sent a delegation to express his sympathy to Hanun concerning his father. When David's envoys came to Hanun in the land of the Ammonites to express sympathy to him, the Ammonite commanders said to Hanun, do you think David is honoring your father by sending envoys to you to express sympathy? Haven't his envoys come to you only to explore and spy out the country and overthrow it? So Hanun seized David's envoys, shaved them, cut off their garments at the buttocks, and sent them away. When someone came and told David about the men, he sent messengers to meet them, for they were greatly humiliated. The king said, stay at Jericho till your beards have grown, and then come back.
The Ammonites' territory was located across the Jordan east of Jerusalem. Given the proximity of the Ammonites, it was crucial to maintain a positive relationship with them. King Nahash had been an adversary of Saul's in 1 Samuel 11, so it makes sense that he was an ally of David's. Nahash most likely befriended David when he was fleeing Saul. David assumes that Nahash's son, Hanun, will also be an ally. So David attempts to send condolences to the new king, Hanun. But Hanun's advisors misinterpret David's gesture, suspecting espionage, and humiliate David's men by cutting off their beards and clothes. This was a serious insult in ancient culture. Beards symbolize masculinity and honor. On top of that, they cut their clothes to expose their private masculinity. Clothes were not easily accessible in ancient culture, which meant there was no immediate way to cover up, and their humiliation would have been public for all the world to see. David responds to the men's shame with honor. These men were only following his orders. He sent a message of encouragement to them, telling them to stay put until the proof of their humiliation was gone and their beard was back. My guess is he also sent them new uniforms. Hanan's treatment of David's envoy was tantamount to declaring war. Hanan should have realized this was a king who was very comfortable with war and would not just sit by.
Verse 6. When the Ammonites realized that they had become obnoxious to David, Hanan and the Ammonites sent 1,000 talents of silver to hire chariots and charioteers from Aram, Naharaim, Aram, Maacah, and Zobah. They hired 32,000 chariots and charioteers, as well as the king of Maacah with his troops, who came and camped near Medeba, while the Ammonites were mustered from their towns and moved out for battle.
So the Ammonites are now afraid. Fearing their army is not enough to defend them, they hire mercenaries from 3 different areas of Aram. The mercenaries hired are fully loaded with 32,000 chariots. Chariots were a really big deal back then.
Verse 8, on hearing this, David sent Joab out with the entire army of fighting men. The Ammonites came out and drew up in battle formation at the entrance to their city, while the kings who had come were by themselves in the open country. Joab saw that there were battle lines in front of him and behind him. So he selected some of the best troops in Israel and deployed them against the Arameans. He put the rest of the men under the command of Abishai, his brother, and they were deployed against the Ammonites. Joab said, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you are to rescue me. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will rescue you. Be strong and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight. Then Joab and the troops with him advanced to fight the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the Ammonites realized that the Arameans were fleeing, they too fled before his brother Abishai and went inside the city. So Joab went back to Jerusalem.
David sent Joab out to fight. Joab found himself caught between 2 enemy lines, but Joab has his brother Abishai at his side and sends him after the Ammonites while he faces the Arameans. In one of Joab's finest moments, for he will disappoint later, he demonstrates his faith by adopting the tone of the great warrior Joshua, saying,
be strong and let us fight bravely for our people and the cities of our God. The Lord will do what is good in his sight.
Well, God delivered in a mighty way, and it appears there was actually no battle at all. The Arameans fled before Joab, and the Ammonites fled before Abishai, and everyone went home to Jerusalem victorious without a scratch upon them. Scene 4. David defeats the Arameans.
1 Chronicles chapter 19, continuing in verse 16. After the Arameans saw that they had been routed by Israel, they sent messengers and had Arameans brought from beyond the Euphrates River, with Shophak, the commander of Hadadezer's army, leading them. When David was told of this, he gathered all Israel and crossed the Jordan. He advanced against them and formed his battle lines opposite them. David formed his lines to meet the Arameans in battle, and they fought against him. But they fled before Israel, and David killed 7,000 of their charioteers and 40,000 of their foot soldiers. He also killed Shophak, the commander of their army. When the vassals of Hadadezer saw that they had been routed by Israel, they made peace with David and became subject to him. So the Arameans were not willing to help the Ammonites anymore.
The Arameans awoke from their God-induced panic that had caused them to flee before Joab and decided that they could not tolerate this humiliation. They were better than this and had to set this record straight. They were going to go back and would start their own war with Israel without any pay from the Ammonites. David doesn't hesitate and decides he wants part of the action himself. Fighting wars was David's calling. In this scene, like many others we have discussed from other seasons of Bible Book Club, I can't help wondering what God and the heavenly hosts were thinking, because I picture them sitting in their luxury theater seats, observing the antics of men with either a chuckle or an eye roll. Like, really, Aram? This is David who serves God, the God. Have you not heard? Do you think you can do this after what happened last time? It makes no sense. But then I stop and think, what do the heavenly hosts think about us when we do obviously stupid things? Do they grieve the consequences for us? They must at times deeply grieve. Certainly, Christ empathizes with our pain, even if our pain is self-induced. However, I hope that there is humor in heaven and that they often view our mistakes as a comedy, not a drama. Certainly we ought to laugh more, for we have the joy of knowing that we are forgiven despite our mistakes. And we have the confidence that we will one day be admitted to the theater where sin and hurt are no more. Well, no surprise here in this battle story. Aram flees again. This time, there's not as much mercy. David pursues and kills 47,000, including their commander. The Arameans were no longer willing to help the Ammonites or engage with David. Game over. So note, in this chapter, the chronicler uses almost the same exact words as Samuel did in 2 Samuel 11. His purpose is to present David as the ideal invincible king. However, Samuel wrote this passage with a subtle literary message and lesson to the reader by repetitively using the word send. We talked about this in seasons, I can't remember what seasons they were, but 1 and 2 Samuel. The chronicler also uses the word send repetitively, but leaves off the crucial comparison that Samuel intended. Each time the word send was used, Samuel was making a statement about David. The king can send because the king is powerful. The king has choices. When the king makes a choice, it is obeyed. When obeyed, there will be consequences. Good consequences if the king's choice was good. Bad consequences if the king's choice was bad. Power can be a blessing or a curse. Therefore, a king must be careful who he sends and what he sends for. What the chronicler leaves out is what happened next in Samuel's story. Every human is tested, tempted, even the ideal David. What happens when David is not fighting battles? Has too much time on his hands? Too much time to think about the other loves he had than God? Scene 5, another Ammonite attempt and defeat. Chapter 20.
In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, Joab led out the armed forces. He laid waste the land of the Ammonites and went to Rabbah and besieged it, but David remained in Jerusalem.
Word for word, these two sentences match Samuel's words in 2 Samuel 11, but not what comes next. In 2 Samuel, David, who remained in Jerusalem, gets up from his bed and takes a walk on the roof of the palace where he sees a woman bathing and he sends for her. He uses his power to send again. Now, David was not where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be out of battle, but he remained back. And as a result, he had too much time on his hands, and we all know what happened next. An affair, a pregnancy, a murder, a wedding, the birth of a child, the death of a child, repentance, forgiveness, and eventually a future king named Solomon. God works all things together for good. But David got caught up in a lot of hurt and sin in between. Our chronicler auspiciously skips the whole sin-filled story and jumps ahead to the victory. Because, well, this is David, and the purpose of this writing is to offer future hope for Israel, and that hope can only come from the line of David. So our author wants to only focus on the good. But as good as David was, he was not perfect. That honor is reserved for the greater King, Jesus Christ. But our poor chronicler had no idea that he was coming. All right, back to those silly Ammonites who also decide they want a second stab at Israel and decide to try without the aid of Aram, even though Aram has now already failed a second time. Cue the heavenly host eye roll.
1 Chronicles chapter 20, continuing in verse 1. Joab attacked Rabbah and left it in ruins. David took the crown from the head of their king. Its weight was found to be a talent of gold, and it was set with precious stones, and it was placed on David's head. He took a great quantity of plunder from the city and brought out the people who were there, consigning them to labor with saws and with iron picks and axes. David did this to all the Ammonite towns. Then David and his entire army returned to Jerusalem.
David defeats the Ammonites and subjects the people of all their towns to forced labor. Now, the crown of the Ammonites must have been substantial, as it is estimated to have weighed approximately 75 pounds. So surely it did not stay on David's head for long. Scene 6, David and his men defeat the sons of Rapha. The sons of Rapha were descendants of the Rephaim. Now, this most notable man named Rapha himself had some killer descendants. Goliath was the most famous in our story. However, there were more, and they did not like David for obvious reasons. The Rephaim were legendary inhabitants of Canaan, known for their great stature and strength. They were probably actually related to the Anakites, a giant people Joshua destroyed in Canaan. Listen to Joshua.
Joshua chapter 15, starting in verse 21. At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir, and Anab, from the hill country of Judah, and from the hill country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them and their towns. No Anakites were left in Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive.
So Joshua goes into Canaan and he destroys the Anakites, but because the Philistine territory of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod was not really in Canaan, there were some who survived there. And the only Anakites or Rephaim left were those in those Philistine territories, which were where 3 of the 5 ruling Philistine cities were. So they developed into the Philistines. David and the Philistines have a rich history, and our chronicler wants the remnant to know that David was victorious over these frightening giants and the Philistines, as it was prophesied that he would. When Samuel appointed a king over Israel, God promised in 1 Samuel 9:16 that the king
will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines.
It was David, not Saul, that God used to fulfill that prophecy.
And now back to our story in 1 Chronicles chapter 20, starting in verse 4. In the course of time, war broke out with the Philistines at Gezer. At that time, Sibbecai the Hushathite killed Sippai, one of the descendants of the Raphaites, and the Philistines were subjugated. In another battle with the Philistines, Elhanan, son of Jair, killed Lahami, the brother of Goliath the Gittite, who had a spear with a shift like a weaver's rod. In still another battle, which took place at Gath, there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He also was descended from Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shimei, David's brother, killed him. These were the descendants of Rapha in Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men.
Okay, so David's mighty warriors defeated the Philistines and their giants in 3 separate battles. Now, this is really kind of funny because here's where we see where Chronicles skips the stories he doesn't like. Like he's reading Samuel's stories and he just skips anything he doesn't like. Because in 2 Samuel 21, Samuel records 4 victories that included 4 giants. The chronicler skips the story of the giant named Ishi-Benob. Perhaps, we don't know what the chronicle is thinking for sure, but listen to this, perhaps because David was tired in that battle, and Abishai came to David's rescue and killed Ishi-Benob, and David's men were so struck by the knowledge that David had almost died that they swore they would not ever let him go into battle with them again. So David's kind of getting older, and they decided he's a liability. And Samuel documented all this, and so the chronicler just skips that one. Well, 3 giants is enough to prove to the remnant that David could do this.
He's trying to encourage these people so he can't have this. smear
You gotta, he's the best press secretary ever.
Yeah.
He whittles out all the bad stuff. The chronicler, of course, instead focused on these 3 battles. The first was the giant Sippai. He was killed by Sibbecai, one of David's mighty men. The second giant was Elami, the brother of Goliath. He was killed by Elhanan, another of David's mighty men. And the third giant has no name, but he's known for these extra fingers and toes. He was killed by Jonathan, who was David's nephew by his brother Shemaiah. The full circle story is that David's first battle was as a shepherd against Goliath. And now the Israelites finish off the family by killing Goliath's fierce relatives. The story is a testimony to David's faith and God's faithfulness. If only the remnant Israelites could have the same faith. This is the purpose of every testimony, David's and ours. If we have faith and tell the story of it, we are like the chronicler, exhorting others to consider a life of faith. God's part is done. Ours is not. God promised a king to save us, and he has delivered. The ball is in our court to share that story, just as our chronicler shared King David's story. You are the chronicler of God's victories today.
We've got merch. Great news! Bible Book Club sweatshirts are here, and they're only available while supplies last. So if you want to snag yours, go to BibleBookClubPodcast.com/store. They're only going to be available while supplies last, so hurry and get yours. And if you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you and all your friends can listen and discuss. New episodes drop every Monday.